After the blizzard at Cumberland Gap, I was in the mood for more southerly latitudes. I was ready for sunshine and salt breezes, for the screaming of seagulls and the texture of sand and the rhythm of Atlantic waves. And so, with Amy in the passenger seat, I drove south toward the subtropical paradise of Georgia's barrier islands. Our destination was the other Cumberland, one far removed from snow and mountain. On Cumberland Island, we would spend 3 days walking deserted beaches and delving into maritime forests. We would be filled with the indescribable intoxication of what the poet Lawrence Durrell called Ilomania. Our adventure began when we boarded the Cumberland Queen in St. Mary's. We sat up top so we could feel the wind on our faces and see the black water of the St. Mary's River churning beneath us. To our left, the Georgia mainland receded. To our right, the Florida salt marshes slid by like quicksilver. On the open water, the curving shapes of dolphins rose and fell with the waves. Our 45-minute ferry ride would deposit us at the Dolphin-esque dock. From there, we would visit the ruins of the Carnegie Mansion. Then we would hoist our backpacks and head north using a variety of trails. At the remote north end of the island, we would spend the night at Bluff. The next day, we would travel south again, stopping at Plum Orchard on one side of the island and the beach on the other. Hickory Hill would be our home for the night. On the final day, we would make our way back to the Dolphin-esque dock and catch the ferry for the return trip to St. Mary's. From the dock, it was a short walk to the tabby gates of Dolphin-esque. And then we stood before the ruined glory of the Carnegies, the broken brick and ivied walls of Lucy's mansion. Elsewhere on the grounds, we found greenhouses and a statue of Mercury and a ruined fountain and the remains of the recreation building that once housed a heated pool. It was there that we had our first close look at the wild horses that roam the island. They looked at me as if I were an intruder. I suppose I was. Back at the dock, the crowd had dispersed and the horses had moved in. We retrieved our backpacks and took our first steps on the river trail. It felt good to be on a trail with some weight on my back again, and rarely has there been a finer day for walking. The shade was cool, the sun welcome on my face. The breeze smelled of salt and pine, and it carried the occasional echo of crashing waves. Palmetto fans clacked as we passed through them. The dark trunks of live oaks were festooned with resurrection ferns and draped with Spanish moss. We would pass through many miles of that maritime forest, and I never tired of it. When we became hungry, we found a path to Little Greyfield Beach. The ground turned suddenly to sand, and the oaken bower gave way to a blinding white beach. When we were finished, we didn't return to the trail. Instead, we walked the beach north to the next crossing. Along the way, we encountered a miscellany of sea life. In the wilderness north of Stafford Beach, we stopped seeing horses and saw armadillos instead. They snuffled through the pine duff. They bounced across the path. They nearly collided with us in their mad search for grubs. The first few were an event. Then they became more common than squirrels. We started counting them, and we made a game of seeing whether we'd encounter more horses or armadillos. At the end of the day, the count was 14 armadillos to 15 horses. After 15 miles of hiking, we reached Brick Hill Bluff. We had arrived in time to see the sun going down over the salt marsh, and the tide going out, and the fiddler crabs retreating into their tunnels. Darkness fell. Lights blinked on the main. I breathed the salt air and hoped the night wouldn't end. It did end, but then came a new day just as sweet and fresh as the last.
I have one more pretzel thing and 2 trail mixes.
Oh boy. Better make it all last. a long morning of pale, calm water and cookies dipped in coffee. We walked among the shell middens and the thousands of crabs at low tide, enjoyed the sight of birds and boats until nearly noon. Our first task of the day was to backtrack 3.5 miles on the island's main road. The night before, it had taken hours to cover that same ground. Now we did it in an effortless hour and a half. Backpacking miles are strange and deceitful things. Soon we reached Plum Orchard. There stands another Carnegie mansion, white and columned and mostly intact. We picnicked on the grounds and wandered wherever we pleased. Then we left the area by the dusty road flanked by azaleas. At Hickory Hill, located almost exactly in the center of the island, we set up camp and then headed east on the Willow Pond Trail. We wanted to see the ocean again. We emerged from the thicket onto the dunes, and then we saw the iron waves of the Atlantic crashing on a desolate strand. It was perhaps the loneliest place I've ever been. It felt as if all the world had passed away, and all that remained was us and the gray sand and the gray water and the gray sky. In either direction, the shoreline dissolved in mist. Birds wheeled over the surf. I felt insignificant, insubstantial. When Amy walked to the water to feel it on her feet, she looked like a speck in a cosmos of sand. We sat down in the middle of that desolation and began cooking dinner. I took a swig from my flask, passed it to Amy, and knew that inexplicably this would always be my favorite part of the trip. I think it reminded me somehow of the terrible beauty of Lake Superior. When we turned around to leave, we realized that we were being watched. And then we passed again through the frog-haunted swamps. The gray sky gave way to gold. Back at camp, it was dark. Amy went to bed immediately. I pulled up my chair to the tent door, and we talked through the fabric of the tent. When she fell silent, I sat in the dark and I listened to the sound of night insects and distant waves and whippoorwills with a Georgia accent.
Oh, geez, look how fast it's burning. All right, it's done.
Shortly after leaving camp, we had the most exciting encounter of the trip. What I first assumed to be horses or armadillos rooting around in the pine duff turned out to be wild hogs instead. I heard their grunting before I saw them. Then there they were, big and black and evil-looking. One of them looked up and began walking in our direction. Maybe it was just curious. Maybe it was going to charge us with tusks flailing. I decided not to find out.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
From there, we passed through a fog blowing in from the sea and stopped at Stafford Campground again. We took different routes where available on the return journey, including another stretch of the main road. There, we were passed by cyclists and joggers and cars. We saw driveways leading to private homes tucked away among the palms. We arrived back at the Dungeness dock 3 hours before the ferry. Neither of us minded waiting. After 32 miles, we relished the idea of sitting and doing nothing for a while, and so that's what we did. And then, too soon, we were on the ferry again, watching the island as it receded in our wake. Eventually, it melted into the horizon, as if it had never existed at all. But my sore feet told me that the enchanted isle was real, and that it would still be there when one day we wished to return. Exclusive footage of Amy in her natural habitat.
I don't know about natural. I don't think so.
Well, that's what I was talking about, pooping in the woods the other day.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by that.